I have no idea what my real name is. The lady at the DMV stared at my license for way too long before looking up at me with this confused expression that made my stomach drop. This expired 6 years ago, she said, tapping the plastic card against her counter. I know, I said. That's why I'm here. I need to renew it. She typed something into her computer, frowned, then typed again slower like maybe she'd made a mistake the first time. Your name isn't coming up in the system at all. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other because the line behind me was getting long and I could feel people staring. I just need to update my address too, I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. Can you do both at once? She typed again, her frown deepening with each keystroke. There's no record of this license number. Not expired, not suspended, just nothing. Like it never existed. That's impossible, I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. I've had that license since I was 16. I've been pulled over before. Cops ran it and it was fine. She called over her supervisor without answering me, and this thin man with wire-rimmed glasses came over and took my license from her hand. He examined it under some kind of special light that made the edges glow, turning it over several times while I stood there feeling my face get hot. This is a real license, he confirmed, looking at me with genuine confusion. The security features are all correct. It was definitely issued by the state. But, he turned to his computer and typed in the number himself. The license number doesn't exist in our database. It's like someone issued this license and then went back and completely erased any record of it ever being created. How is that even possible? I asked, my hands starting to shake. He shrugged and handed the license back to me. Government database error, maybe? It happens sometimes with older records. System migrations can corrupt data. You'll need to apply as a first-time applicant and provide all your original documents. Birth certificate, social security card, proof of residency, the whole thing. But I drove here, I said, looking down at the invalid license in my hand. If this license doesn't exist in your system, doesn't that mean I've been driving illegally for 6 years? The supervisor looked uncomfortable and glanced at the growing line behind me. Technically, yes, but you obviously didn't know. Just get your documents together and come back. We'll get you sorted out. I left the DMV in a daze and sat in my car for 10 minutes just staring at my steering wheel. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss asking where I was because I was supposed to be at work an hour ago, but I couldn't make myself drive yet. At home that evening, I pulled out my file cabinet and started going through everything. My birth certificate was right where it always was, tucked into a folder with other important documents. But when I actually looked at it, really examined it closely for the first time in years, something felt wrong. The paper was too new, too crisp and white for a document that was supposedly 23 years old. My parents' birth certificates that I'd seen before were yellowed and soft, but mine looked like it had been printed last month. I held it up to the light from my desk lamp and noticed the official seal looked slightly smudged, like someone had photocopied it and the toner hadn't set quite right. I called my mom while staring at the birth certificate, my heart starting to pound. Hey, where exactly was I born? I tried to keep my voice casual. St. Mary's Hospital, she answered immediately, but there was something too quick about her response. Why are you asking about this now? Just updating some records at the DMV, I said. They need all my original documents. What city was St. Mary's in again? There was a pause that went on too long, just dead air on the phone while I counted the seconds. Columbus, honey, she finally said. Why all these questions? I pulled up Google on my laptop and typed in St. Mary's Hospital Columbus while she was still talking. The first result was a historical society page about closed hospitals. St. Mary's Hospital had shut down permanently in 1997, 5 full years before I was supposedly born there in 2002. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice level. St. Mary's Hospital in Columbus closed in 1997. I'm looking at the website right now. Another pause. Longer this time. Different St. Mary's, she said. There were 2 hospitals with that name in Ohio. Which one? I pressed, already searching for a second St. Mary's and finding nothing. She got defensive, her voice rising slightly. I don't remember every single detail from 23 years ago. You were born, that's what matters. The hospital did its job. Why are you interrogating me about this? But when I tried to push for more specifics about the hospital, the doctor, anything concrete, she said she had to go help Dad with something and hung up before I could ask another question. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time before I pulled out my social security card from the same folder. The number format looked right, the card looked official, but I'd never actually verified it was real. I called the Social Security Administration and waited on hold for 15 minutes listening to terrible elevator music. Finally, a woman answered and I gave her my social security number to verify. She put me on hold again, and when she came back, her tone had completely changed from bored bureaucrat to suspicious investigator. Ma'am, this social security number is showing up in our system as issued to someone else entirely, she said slowly. Someone who died 8 years ago. That's identity theft. You need to report this immediately and apply for a new number with proper documentation. But I've been using this number my whole life, I said, my throat getting tight. I used it for school enrollment, for my first job at 16, for college applications, for everything. How is this possible? The woman's voice got more serious. How old did you say you are? 23, I told her. And you're telling me you've been using a deceased person's social security number since childhood? She went quiet for a moment. I'm transferring you to our fraud department. You need to speak with an investigator. I hung up before the transfer went through because my hands were shaking too badly to hold the phone anymore. I set it down on my desk and just sat there trying to breathe normally while my mind raced through every implication. I pulled up Google again and started searching for myself. My name plus my birthday. Nothing came up. Not my high school graduation. Not any old social media posts. Nothing. I tried my name plus my high school. Still nothing. I had friends from high school on Facebook, people I talked to regularly, but when I went to my own profile and scrolled back, my oldest posts only went back about 3 years. Everything before that was just gone like I hadn't existed. I called my best friend from high school, Violet, trying to keep my voice steady. Hey, random question, but do you have any photos from our graduation? Sure, she said. Why? I lost all mine when my old laptop died. I lied. Can you send them to me? She said she'd look through her files and send them over. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a message containing a link to a shared photo album. I opened it and started scrolling through dozens of photos from graduation day. There was Violet in her cap and gown. There was Kayla hugging her parents. There was David throwing his cap in the air. All our friends, our teachers, the ceremony, everything. I scrolled through 47 photos twice. I wasn't in a single one. I called Violet back immediately. Why am I not in any of the graduation photos? What do you mean? Her voice sounded genuinely confused. We graduated together. I can see you, me, Kayla, David, everyone else, but I'm not in any of them. Look again. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her clicking through the photos. That's weird, she finally said. I could have sworn you were in some of these. Maybe you left early? I had to be in some photos, Violet. We were best friends. We took photos together. She hesitated, and that hesitation made my stomach drop. I mean, we've been friends for like 3 years, right? Since we met at that party sophomore year of college? No, I said, my voice rising. Since sophomore year of high school. We had English together with Mrs. Hartman. We did that Romeo and Juliet project together. Remember? I don't remember that class, she said slowly. I don't remember you in high school at all. I remember meeting you at Logan's party when we were 20. You were wearing that blue dress. That's when we became friends. My chest got tight and I couldn't breathe right. That's not true. I have memories of us in high school. Clear memories. Maybe you're mixing me up with someone else, she suggested, her voice getting concerned. Are you okay? You sound really stressed. I hung up without answering and just sat there on my couch staring at nothing. My cat jumped up next to me and I petted her automatically while my brain tried to process what was happening. I stood up suddenly and went to my bookshelf, pulling out my high school yearbook from the second shelf. I'd looked at it a few times over the years, laughing at old photos and bad hairstyles. I flipped to the senior class section and started scanning the pages. Violet was there with her theatrical smile. David was there looking awkward. Kayla was there with her perfect hair. I went through every single page of seniors twice. My name wasn't listed anywhere. Not on the class roster, not under any photos, nowhere. I found all my friends, but I wasn't there. I called my mom again. She didn't answer. I called my dad. He picked up on the third ring, and I could hear the TV in the background. Hey, sweetie, what's up? Dad, I need you to tell me something. What's my real name? What kind of question is that? He sounded confused but not concerned yet. Your name is right there on your birth certificate. That birth certificate is fake, I said, my voice shaking. The hospital it lists closed before I was born. My social security number belongs to someone who died. I'm not in my high school yearbook. I'm not in any photos from graduation. What is my actual name? There was a long silence on the other end, and I could hear him breathing. Honey, where are you getting these ideas? I went to the DMV today, I said. My driver's license doesn't exist in their system. My social security number is fraudulent. I'm not in any records from high school. None of this makes sense unless my entire identity is fabricated. So I need you to tell me the truth. Who am I? Your name is on your birth certificate, he said, but his voice sounded weird. Flat, like he was reading from a script. That's not an answer, Dad. You need to calm down and stop inventing problems where there aren't any, he said, but I could hear something underneath his words. Not anger, but fear. I grabbed my keys and drove to my parents' house without calling first, breaking every speed limit on the way. They lived 40 minutes away in the suburbs where I'd supposedly grown up, in the house I supposedly spent my childhood in. Mom answered the door, already looking worried like Dad had called and warned her I was coming. We need to talk, I said, pushing past her before she could respond. Dad was in the living room in his usual chair, but he wasn't watching TV. He was just sitting there waiting. I stood in front of him with my arms crossed. I want the truth, right now. About what? Dad said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. About who I am, I said. About why nothing in my life actually exists in any official records. You're our daughter, Mom said from behind me, her voice high and strained. You're upset about something and you're making it into something bigger than it is. I pulled out my phone and showed them the expired license. This doesn't exist in the DMV system, I said. I showed them the photo I'd taken of my birth certificate. This hospital was closed when I was supposedly born. I held up my social security card. This number belongs to someone who died 8 years ago. I pulled up the graduation photos on my phone. I'm not in a single photo from my own graduation. Now stop lying and tell me my real name. They looked at each other, and I saw it happen. That same look married couples do. A whole conversation passed between them in complete silence. Dad's face crumbled a little and Mom's eyes filled with tears. Sit down, Dad finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I sat on the edge of the couch, every muscle in my body tense and ready to run. Your name is Grace, Mom said, sitting down next to Dad and taking his hand. But that's not the name you were born with. That's not the name we gave you when you were born because we didn't give you that name at all. What was my birth name? I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know the answer. They looked at each other again. and I saw something like panic flash between them. We don't know, Dad said quietly, and the words seemed to cost him something. What do you mean you don't know? My voice came out louder than I intended. How do you not know your own daughter's birth name? Mom twisted her hands together in her lap, and I noticed how old she suddenly looked. We adopted you when you were 5 years old, she said, through a private adoption agency. The adoption was closed and sealed. They gave us almost no information about you, just your approximate age and the fact that you needed a home immediately. Why didn't you tell me? I could barely get the words out through my tight throat. We wanted to, Dad said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. God, we wanted to tell you so many times. But the agency made us sign legal agreements, multiple contracts. They said disclosure before you turned 18 could put you in danger. They said your safety absolutely depended on a complete identity change. Protection from what? I demanded. They wouldn't say, Mom whispered, tears starting to roll down her face. They just kept saying that people were looking for you, that you needed to disappear completely. New name, new birth certificate, new social security number, new everything. They said if we ever told you the truth or tried to find out more about your past, they would remove you from our home immediately. I stood up because I couldn't sit still anymore. So you've been lying to me for 18 years. Every birthday, every time I asked about baby photos, every single time. We were protecting you, Dad said, standing up too. We did what we thought was right. What the agency told us was necessary to keep you safe. I felt like I was going to throw up. I need to see the adoption file. Whatever documents you have. I need to see all of it right now. Dad shook his head slowly. We don't have it anymore. The agency required us to destroy all adoption documents and records when you turned 18. It was part of the original agreement. We had to sign an affidavit confirming destruction. That can't be legal, I said. But even as I said it, I knew it probably was. Private adoptions had different rules. They said it was the only way to keep you safe, Mom said, her voice breaking. They said if any documents existed, they could be subpoenaed or discovered. Complete erasure was the only protection. So I could be anyone, I said, my voice going flat. I could have been kidnapped. I could be a missing child whose parents are still looking for them. I could have a whole other family out there. We don't think so, Dad said quickly. The agency did background checks. They assured us you were legally available for adoption. But you don't actually know that, I said. You just trusted what they told you. They looked at each other again and said nothing, which was answer enough. What was the agency called? I asked, pulling out my phone. If they did this to me, they did it to other kids. There has to be records somewhere. Secure Futures Adoption Services, Mom said quietly. They were based in Cleveland. Operated for about 15 years before shutting down. I was already typing, searching for anything I could find. The agency's website was archived but completely generic. They specialized in high-risk placements and confidential adoptions. There was a phone number listed, but when I called it right there in my parents' living room, I got a disconnected message. I found a news article from 2015 about Secure Futures shutting down. The state had launched an investigation into their practices after several families complained about irregularities in their adoptions. But the investigation closed when the agency voluntarily dissolved, and the founder, David Kramer, died suddenly of a heart attack. All their files were sealed by court order as part of the dissolution agreement. Convenient, I muttered, still scrolling through search results. How did you even find this agency? They found us, Dad said, sitting back down heavily. We'd been trying to adopt through legitimate channels for years. 3 different agencies turned us down. Then one day we got a phone call out of nowhere from a man who said they had a child who desperately needed immediate placement. He said the situation was urgent and asked if we could come meet you that weekend. That's so many red flags, I said, looking up at them. You had to know something was wrong. We were desperate, Mom said, her voice barely audible. We'd wanted a child for so long. And when we met you, you were so small and scared and sweet. You had these big eyes and you wouldn't talk to anyone. You just held this stuffed rabbit they'd given you. We fell in love with you immediately. So you ignored every warning sign because you wanted a kid, I said, and I knew I was being cruel, but I couldn't stop. They both flinched. It's more complicated than that, Dad said. The agency had all the right credentials and licenses. Their paperwork looked legitimate. They had lawyers and social workers. It seemed real. I left their house without saying goodbye and drove around for hours, not really going anywhere. I ended up at an all-night diner at 2 a.m., sitting in a booth with terrible coffee, trying to figure out what to do next. I pulled out my laptop and started making a list of everything I needed to investigate. The adoption agency, missing children from around 2001 when I would have been taken, legal ways to access sealed adoption records, DNA testing to find biological relatives. The list got longer and longer until I had to start a second page. The next morning, I went to the county courthouse as soon as it opened. I asked the clerk about sealed adoption records, and she explained Ohio's laws. Adoptees could petition the court for their original birth certificates, but only if they could prove compelling need. Even then, if the adoption was classified as confidential or high risk, the records might be sealed permanently by court order. I filed the petition anyway, knowing it would probably take months and might not work. The filing fee was $175 that I really couldn't afford, but I paid it anyway. Then I went to the public library and spent 6 hours searching through newspaper archives from 1999 to 2003, looking for missing children cases. I found hundreds. Children taken by non-custodial parents, runaways, suspected abductions, bodies found, some recovered safely, most never found. I made notes on every case involving a girl approximately my age, but there was no way to know which one might be me or if I was even in there at all. My eyes burned from staring at the microfiche screen and my head pounded from trying to see my face in every grainy photograph. I ordered a DNA testing kit from one of those ancestry websites that same day, paying extra for rush processing. The kit arrived 3 days later and I did the cheek swab immediately, mailed it back, and then spent 2 weeks obsessively checking my email for results. When they finally came, I had matches to several distant cousins, 4th and 5th degree relatives scattered across the country. I messaged every single one through the website's system, explaining that I was adopted and trying to find my biological family. Most never responded. A few wrote back saying they didn't recognize my information and couldn't help. One woman said her family hadn't had any children go missing that she knew of and wished me luck. I used some of my savings to hire a private investigator who specialized in adoption searches. His name was Leonard Cross, and his office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation place. He listened to my whole story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me. "This is going to be difficult," he said. Secure Futures covered their tracks well. Most of their staff scattered when the agency closed. The ones I've tracked down for previous cases usually won't talk because of NDAS and legal threats, but I'll see what I can do. Leonard started by trying to locate former employees of Secure Futures. He gave me updates every few days. Most had moved out of state. 3 had died. Several refused to speak with him. Finally, after 3 weeks, he found a woman named Barbara Walsh, who'd been a caseworker at Secure Futures for 4 years. She agreed to meet with me, but only in a public place and only if I came alone. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a rainy afternoon. Barbara was in her early 60s with gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes that had probably seen too much. She ordered chamomile tea and sat across from me in the corner booth I'd chosen. "I want to help you," she said before I could even start my questions. "But you need to understand I signed legal documents. An NDA that doesn't expire. If they find out I talked to you, I could face serious consequences." I nodded, my phone recording in my pocket even though I knew I probably couldn't use it legally. "Tell me about Secure Futures." She stirred her tea slowly. They did good work initially. David Kramer genuinely wanted to help children in dangerous situations. Kids whose parents were in prison, kids in abusive homes, kids caught in custody battles that were destroying them. But somewhere along the way, things got ethically questionable. "How so?" I leaned forward. "Some of the adoptions weren't fully legitimate," she said quietly. "Children removed from situations without proper court oversight. Identity changes that weren't entirely legal. Kramer believed he was saving children, and maybe he was in some cases. But he started cutting corners, making decisions that should have gone through courts and social services." She took a sip of her tea. "Toward the end, before the investigation started, several of us were concerned but afraid to speak up. Do you remember a 5-year-old girl placed in 2004? I asked, sliding a photo of myself at that age across the table. Barbara looked at it for a long time, and I saw recognition flash across her face. "I remember several placements that year," she said carefully. "But there was one case that always bothered me. A little girl we called Lily in our internal files. I don't know if that was her real name. She was removed from her mother's custody under emergency circumstances. Kramer said the mother was involved with dangerous people and the child needed to disappear immediately." "What kind of dangerous people?" I pressed, my heart racing. Barbara hesitated, glancing around the coffee shop. "I never got full details. Kramer kept that case extremely confidential. Even the caseworkers didn't have complete access to her file. But I remember him saying this particular child needed to vanish completely. New identity, new family, total erasure of her past. He said lives depended on her disappearing." "That sounds like me," I said, my voice barely steady. "Do you remember the mother's name? Anything that could help me find her?" Barbara shook her head slowly. "Kramer was paranoid about that case. He kept all the original documentation in his personal safe. After he died and the agency dissolved, that safe was opened as part of the investigation. It was empty. Every document related to that adoption had been removed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I do remember the mother came to our office once. This was maybe a month after the placement. She was screaming and crying, demanding her daughter back. Security had to physically escort her out. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair. She kept screaming a name, but I couldn't make it out clearly through the door." "What happened to her?" I asked. Barbara looked genuinely sad. "I don't know. Kramer filed for a restraining order against her. He told the staff she was dangerous and unstable, that we'd saved her daughter from a terrible situation. He said she was involved with drug dealers or criminals, I can't remember exactly. He said the child was better off never knowing where she came from." My hands started shaking around my coffee cup. But what if he was wrong? What if she was just a mother trying to get her child back? Barbara met my eyes directly. "Then you're in an impossible situation," she said quietly, "because everyone who could tell you the truth is either dead or legally silenced, and the records that could prove anything have been destroyed." I left that meeting feeling hollow. Leonard kept investigating for another month, but every lead went nowhere. Kramer was dead. The other senior staff at Secure Futures refused to talk or claimed they didn't remember. The lawyer who handled the agency's dissolution said all records were destroyed per court order, and he couldn't discuss the cases. My petition to unseal my adoption records was denied by the judge. He said curiosity wasn't sufficient compelling need, and I'd have to prove medical necessity or evidence of illegal adoption. I filed an appeal, but my lawyer said it would take at least a year, and probably wouldn't succeed. I started having dreams that felt more real than dreams should. A woman with dark curly hair singing in Spanish. A small apartment with yellow kitchen walls. A man with a deep voice who scared me. A blue teddy bear that I loved. I didn't know if these were actual memories surfacing or just my imagination trying to fill in 20 years of blank space. My therapist said it was common for adoptees to experience this kind of thing, that the brain sometimes creates false memories to cope with identity loss. I went back to my parents and asked them every detail they could remember about when they first got me. Your name was Grace when we got you, Mom said. The agency said they'd already changed it once before we met you, so you'd respond to Grace. But they never told us what your name was before that. What else do you remember? I pushed. Mom and Dad looked at each other, having that silent conversation again. You didn't talk much for the first few weeks, Mom finally said. You barely spoke at all. You'd answer yes or no questions by nodding or shaking your head, but you wouldn't use words unless you absolutely had to. Dad added details slowly. You had nightmares every single night for months. You'd wake up screaming and crying and we couldn't comfort you. You'd just huddle in the corner of your room until you fell back asleep from exhaustion. It took almost a year before you'd let us hug you or tuck you in at night. What else? I demanded, needing every detail. You were terrified of loud noises, Mom said. If someone dropped something or a door slammed, you'd immediately drop to the floor and cover your head, like you'd been trained to respond to violence. And you wouldn't let anyone touch your left arm for the longest time. You'd scream if we tried to help you change clothes or if the doctor needed to examine you. My left arm. I slowly rolled up my sleeve and really looked at the scar on my upper arm for the first time with new eyes. I'd always assumed it was from some childhood accident, maybe falling off a bike. But looking at it now, really examining it, the scar seemed deliberate. 3 straight lines, parallel to each other. I took photos of the scar from every angle and sent them to a forensic consultant Leonard recommended. She called me 2 days later. The scarring pattern is consistent with intentional cutting, she said. Based on the depth and placement, I'd estimate these were inflicted when you were between 3 and 5 years old. They could be defensive wounds from trying to protect yourself, or they could be deliberately inflicted by someone else. Either way, they're evidence of trauma. I sat down hard when she said that, the room spinning slightly. Is there anything else I should look for? She asked me to check for other scars or marks. I found a small circular scar on my shoulder that could have been a cigarette burn. A faint line along my ribs that might have been from a belt. Evidence written on my body of a past I couldn't remember. My therapist helped me work through everything over the next 6 months. The identity crisis, the anger at my parents, the grief for a mother I didn't remember. She said it was normal to feel betrayed even when you understood someone's intentions were good. She also said something that hit me hard during one session. You might never find all the answers, she said gently. The records are gone, the people who knew are dead or silent, and your early childhood memories might never come back. You have to decide if you can build an identity without knowing where you came from. Can you accept being Grace without knowing who you were before? I didn't have a good answer to that. 6 months after this all started, I got a notification from the DNA website. A new match had been found. First cousin. Close enough to matter. Close enough to potentially lead me home. I messaged immediately, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype the message 3 times. My name is Grace. I'm adopted and searching for my biological family. I think we might be related. Her response came 3 hours later. I'm Sophie. My aunt had a daughter who disappeared in 2004. She was 4 years old. The family has been looking for her for 20 years. Do you have a photo? I sent her several pictures. Childhood photos my parents had taken, recent photos, everything I had. Sophie called me within 10 minutes, her voice shaking. Oh my God. You look exactly like my cousin Nina. Like exactly. We need to meet. Can you come to Cleveland? I drove there the next day, taking off work without explanation. We met at a restaurant downtown, and Sophie brought her mother and her aunt Elena. Elena was small with dark curly hair going gray and eyes that looked just like mine. When she saw me walk in, she stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. She put her hand over her mouth and just started crying. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Tell me about Nina, I said. My voice came out steady, even though my hands were shaking. Elena pulled out a photo album from a bag at her feet. Baby pictures? Toddler pictures? A little girl with dark hair and my same eyes. You were born Nina Isabel Rivera on March 15th, 2000, not 2002 like your current birth certificate says, she said, her voice breaking on every word. You were my first baby, my only baby. You loved music and dancing. Your favorite food was macaroni and cheese. You had this little blue teddy bear you took everywhere. The blue teddy bear. I remembered that from my dreams. What happened? I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. Elena wiped her eyes with a napkin. Your father was Daniel Rivera. We met when I was 18, too young and too stupid to see who he really was. By the time I realized he was involved in dealing drugs and running with dangerous people, I was pregnant with you. I tried to leave him when you were 2, but he threatened to kill me if I took you. So I stayed for 2 more years, trying to protect you, trying to find a way out. She showed me more photos. Me at age 3 sitting on a woman's lap. Me at age 4 blowing out birthday candles. Finally, when you were 4, I got the courage to leave, Elena continued. I took you and ran to a women's shelter in Akron. I filed for emergency custody and got a restraining order. Daniel wasn't supposed to come anywhere near us, but he had connections, people who owed him favors, people who knew how to make things disappear. Her voice broke completely, including people. One day I dropped you at the shelter's daycare while I went to a job interview, she said. When I came back 2 hours later, you were gone. The daycare worker said a man came with official-looking paperwork saying he was from Child Services and there was an emergency. She let him take you. Just let him walk out with you. I called the police immediately, but they said it sounded like a custody dispute and I needed to handle it through family court. I told them my ex-boyfriend had taken you, that he was dangerous, but they said without proof of immediate danger, there wasn't much they could do right away. I searched for you for months, Elena said, pulling out a thick folder of documents. Police reports, private investigator reports, court filings, everything. I hired 3 different investigators over the years. I never stopped looking. But Daniel had help from someone who knew how to make children disappear. Someone who made fake documents, changed identities, erased paper trails. It wasn't until the Secure Futures investigation happened in 2015 that I learned what really happened. A reporter covering the investigation found my name in some old files and called me. What did you learn? I asked. Elena's hands were shaking as she pulled out newspaper clippings. They found evidence that David Kramer, the man who ran Secure Futures, had connections to people who facilitated illegal adoptions. He would pay certain people to bring him children who needed to disappear. Children from custody disputes, children whose parents were criminals, children no one would look too hard for. He'd create new identities for them and place them with families desperate enough to not ask questions. The newspaper said Kramer paid Daniel $50,000 for you. $50,000. My father sold me. Elena was crying again. I wanted to find you so badly. I never stopped hoping. But by the time I learned about Secure Futures, the agency was already dissolved. Kramer was dead. All the records were sealed or destroyed. The investigation found evidence of wrongdoing but couldn't prosecute anyone because the main perpetrators were dead or had left the country. I hit dead end after dead end. Until Sophie took that DNA test last year and we started getting matches that didn't make sense. Matches to people we didn't know. She showed me her results. And then you showed up, 20 years later. I sat with Elena for 6 hours at that restaurant, looking through photos and documents, learning about Nina Rivera. My real birthday was March 15th, which meant I'd been celebrating the wrong birthday for 18 years. My real name was Nina Isabel Rivera. I had been stolen from my mother and sold to an adoption agency that specialized in making children disappear. I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Is Daniel still alive? I asked. Elena shook her head. He died 6 years ago. Overdose in a motel outside Phoenix. He can't tell us anything about what happened during those missing years, so we might never know exactly how I ended up with Secure Futures. Elena nodded. There are gaps we can't fill, but we know you're Nina. We know you're my daughter. The DNA proves it. We know you were taken from me and sold. We know your identity was erased. The question is what happens now? That question stayed with me for months. I started spending time with Elena, learning about the family I came from. She told me about my grandmother who died when I was a baby. My grandfather, who left before I was born, cousins and aunts and uncles I'd never met, stories about Nina, about who I was supposed to be. It felt like learning about a stranger who happened to have my face. Do you want us to call you Nina? Elena asked one day. We can call you whatever you want. I don't know, I admitted. I've been Grace for 20 years. I don't know how to be Nina. My relationship with my adoptive parents got complicated. They struggled with guilt about participating in what was essentially a trafficking operation, even though they didn't know. I struggled with anger that they'd ignored red flags because they wanted a child so badly. We went to family therapy together. The therapist helped us talk through everything. They love you, the therapist told me during a solo session. They made mistakes, but their love for you is real. Can you hold both things as true? Your parents bought you from traffickers and they raised you with love. Both things are true. I didn't know if I could, but I was trying. Leonard helped me petition to have my legal name changed to Nina Grace Rivera. A compromise. A way to honor both lives, both identities. The judge approved it after I showed him all the evidence we'd gathered. My new driver's license says Nina Grace Rivera with my real birthday of March 15th, 2000. I'm actually 24, not 23. I lost 2 years somewhere in the erasure of my identity. I testified in federal court about Secure Futures practices as part of a larger investigation into adoption fraud and child trafficking. My testimony helped connect several cases and led to 3 arrests of people who'd worked with Kramer. They couldn't prosecute Kramer himself because he was dead, but they got some of his accomplices. Elena and I go to therapy together now, working through everything. She tells me stories about Nina, about my early childhood, and occasionally something triggers a real memory. The yellow kitchen walls, the blue teddy bear, the woman singing in Spanish. The pieces are coming back slowly, but with so many gaps that might never fill. I learned that identity isn't just a name or a birthday. It's everything. Your memories, your experiences, the people who shaped you, the way you see yourself. I'm both Nina and Grace now, both the daughter who was stolen and the daughter who was raised with love, both Elena's baby and my parents' child. Learning to hold both truths simultaneously has been the hardest thing I've ever done, but I'm learning. 2 years after that DMV visit that started everything, I legally reclaimed my original birth certificate. Nina Isabel Rivera, born March 15th, 2000, at Cleveland Medical Center. Mother, Elena Maria Rivera. Father, Daniel Rivera. My real history, my real beginning. I framed it and hung it on my wall next to a photo of my adoptive parents at my college graduation.